Thank you very much, Randall. It's great to be here with all of you on a bright Sunday morning. Well, Sunday morning anyway. For those who don't know what Americans for Limited Government is, it was founded by Howie Rich, who's a member of the Cato Board, as well as Eric O'Keefe, who's a former member of the Cato Board. And we work with grassroots activists around the country, primarily in the initiative and referendum states, to put constitutional measures on ballots through the petition process and get a vote. We've been pursuing 22 initiatives in 13 states during this election cycle. The courts have had their way with us, I hate to say, and we aren't going to have 22 on the ballots as a result of what I would like to refer to as rogue courts in Montana, Michigan, and Nevada, and I'm sure there will be others. I sometimes wonder if we are focusing on the wrong things and we should really start with the courts, because the courts and the outrages they do on a regular basis, they're very outcome-based. They know the decision they want in advance, and it's a little disturbing when people put an awful lot of work into a grassroots campaign to qualify a measure for the ballot, and then the other side is able to bounce it off because of a friendly court. But anyhow, we work with people to help local folks who sometimes need a little help, sometimes don't, and we learn an awful lot from people out in the states. In fact, John, who's going to speak in a minute, was deeply involved in the referendum C fight, and I think we learned an awful lot from his work and all the people in Colorado's work on how to do it right and how to do it wrong and how we can get better. I'd like to just talk for a brief second about the term American Dream and American Dream Coalition. Randall and I were talking at breakfast this morning. I think that's an interesting term, and we were joking about that term versus smart growth, which is also a very interesting term. And over a long period of time, the other side has always been smarter in their naming conventions. And what I like about American Dream and the American Dream Coalition is it's broad on the one hand, so it's flexible, but it creates an emotional connection with most people right out of the gate. And one of the things that we are not good enough, particularly in the policy side, is figuring out how to take policy into an emotional connection. So I'm actually kind of curious in the room this morning, how many people here are considered policy people, if you will? The wonkish folks. Okay, and how many are activists? More activist oriented. Okay, surprisingly a great balance, and I think that's often how it works. You have to have that balance. And I think one of the weaknesses in our movement is connecting those two parts in a meaningful way that leads to effective campaigns. You know, I think effective campaigns always start, as I mentioned a second ago, with an emotional connection. I'm curious, how many of you have seen Suzette Kelo actually speak? Anybody here seen her give her speech? Where'd you see her? Television. On television. She spoke, which would be very good. I've seen her speak twice, and Suzette Kelo, I'm sorry, there's a wonkish moment. I forget that sometimes one must say who she is. Suzette Kelo is the woman whose house was taken, although she's going to get to keep her house as it turns out, in Kelo versus New London, the June 2004 case. New London wanted to do redevelopment, private development, take one person's private property, give it to another because it'll generate higher tax revenues. And it's an amazingly compelling story. The first time I saw her speak was at the CPAC convention last winter. And I'm guessing there were, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 people in the room. And I would bet over half had teary eyes at the end because she tells an amazing story. She's an amazing woman. She's just an everyday person, works a couple of jobs as a nurse, has a husband with some health issues, you know, worked her tail off for years to buy her dream house in this part of New Haven, and buys it and is fixing it up and making it better in her own way. And then she hears this rumor that the city wants to come and take her property. And I can't do justice to that story, but it is an amazing, amazing, emotionally traumatizing story. And I think the evil of that decision speaks for itself. The lemonade out of that lemon, of course, is that it has animated people on property rights in general in a way that hadn't been done in a long, long time. There's been this drip, drip, drip of public usage. And now public usage means that none of us are really safe in our homes, our businesses, or our churches. We do a lot of work with churches as well. And wherever you might be on the faith issue, a church getting itself appropriated by the state using the coercive power of government because it doesn't generate any tax revenues, that sort of lets us all know where we are, which is really a tax generating a device for the state. Coming back to campaigns, let's talk just for a minute why I think campaigns are important. I think sometimes in the policy side we get a little caught up in the policy and not always their connection to a campaign. And I would encourage all of you on the policy side to always think of your policies in terms of a campaign. Campaigns are crucial, and John, I know, is going to talk a lot about this as well in terms of the grassroots movement, because campaigns and grassroots activism are what puts into practice your policies. It's nice to sit and talk about it and come to a conference like this and debate these things, which I think is absolutely crucial. But I am always equally amazed, in some ways not more so, by the volunteers all across the country. And some of you are here today. We were just talking a moment ago about trying to save Santa Barbara. I forget what the term is. You have to have a campaign to, number one, just get status quo, because the other side is on the inside. They have the policy positions. They're the ones who are influencing local government. So just to hold them back, you have to have campaigns and activists out there doing that. But let alone to roll back some of these encroachments on our liberty, I think you really need to think in terms of policy as it relates to a campaign. Your ideas can become policy much more quickly if you think of yourself as the nexus of networking with people who become good activists. Let me just briefly mention on these campaigns, on the Kilo campaigns, there's Kilo and there's Kilo Plus. Just briefly, I'll mention what that means. Kilo fix means a simple fix. One of the things the Supreme Court case said was that the states could take it upon themselves to fix this problem, that they're not going to prevent government from taking private property from one person and giving it to another, but the states could do that. So that's called a simple Kilo fix. Kilo Plus is that plus regulatory takings. Kilo really animates people quickly, everybody gets that. But the average person out there doesn't understand the impact of regulatory takings and the devaluation of people's property and value over time by these regulatory encroachments. It's a far bigger economic problem, regulatory takings. Kilo is the tip of the iceberg, and the regulatory takings are the bottom of it. I was talking to a reporter from NPR a couple of weeks ago, and he kept saying, well, these regulatory takings really aren't a problem. You still have your property. And I said, that's a lot like if I go on vacation and the local city arsonist comes by and tortures my house and it come back to nothing but a pile of burned out rubble. I still own it, but it's not really worth very much. And he just did not seem to understand that. And they're relentless in that idea. The other thing that they don't understand is what regulatory reform is about is reforming who pays. This is about restoring control of regulation to the citizens at large to make informed decisions as a community. You can still regulate, but the community now has to foot that bill. The way regulatory takings have worked over the last 30 or 40 years is we look around the room and I am the dictatorial mayor of whatever town anywhere USA, and I pick you because I like your house. And so I'm going to devalue your property and you're going to pay for it while all of us benefit. That's essentially how it works. And what these regulatory reforms do is they make all of you engage in that debate, and we all say, we think your property ought to become a park, or perhaps instead of building 5 houses on your 2 acres, now you can just build 1 because we want more green space. And we want to do that, and we're going to enforce that, but you all have to pay. And as soon as you all have to pay, suddenly the view is a little different. Well, I don't know if I really need the green space that much. I mean, he's living there and cutting his grass, and it looks pretty nice to me. So that's kind of the difference in the debate. It's restoring citizen control and a community sharing in the responsibility of these community decisions, as opposed to elitist governmental bureaucrats, frankly, picking the victim who has their property devalued to achieve some do-gooder purpose. I love the do-gooders. They're so, so nice. Let's talk for just a second about campaigns and what makes a winning campaign. I think one of the keys to a winning campaign is some of the work that all of the people here on the policy side do, and that is you have to have intellectual substance to a campaign. You don't want to campaign on the intellectual substance, for God's sakes, and we do that way too much. But you definitely have to have intellectual substance. The other side will attack relentlessly. And you have to have the meat on the bone when it comes to the logical reasoning for a particular policy position. The second thing a winning campaign needs, and perhaps the most important thing, is frankly you need a victim. You need a Suzette Kilo. You need a person that will animate the public. One of the main things we spent an awful lot of time on, and a huge amount of man hours, was what we would call the Finding the Victim program. We were searching for victims all across the country. And we found lots of them, and others have found lots of them besides us, because there unfortunately are thousands upon thousands upon thousands, if not millions of people who are victimized. Sometimes they don't even realize it, by having their property rights encroached upon. And having a compelling victim is a key thing. In Oklahoma, Reverend Gilden in the Sand Springs Church turned out to be a perfect victim, an African-American Baptist church with about 100 folks that they were trying to take as part of a larger parcel of this redevelopment to give it to private developers to put in a Home Depot. So obviously you need a victim, you need a villain. And a villain, the other side is fantastic at finding villains. I mean, the big oil companies, the auto companies, are conspiring to prevent hydrogen fuel from making it to the marketplace. Of course, military-industrial, it goes on and on with the victims, and villains, rather. Our villains are, of course, the mayor of Sand Springs in that case, who wants to, generate more tax revenue at the expense of the folks going to this Baptist church. The good news is that they finally backed off, and the church just recently got its total reprieve, and so this development will go on around that church. And Reverend Gilden is touring the country and part of a Protect Our Homes and Churches coalition. This is going on all over the country. Churches are first in line because they generate zero tax dollars. And as most of you probably know, the main reason all this is happening is because local governments are desperate for ever-increasing tax revenues, because the do-gooders are there every day trying to figure out new ways to spend taxpayer dollars, but it's difficult to raise taxpayer dollars on an incremental basis where you raise property taxes or raise a sales tax, because that does animate people. People get upset about that. But if you have a new development by taking somebody's property, back to your property again, we're going to put a Home Depot on it. I hope that's okay with you, because it'll generate far more revenues for the city than what your property tax does of $2,000 or $3,000 a year. And they literally calculate that out when they put these programs together. It's an astonishingly coercive, evil use of government power. And the more people understand it, I think the more frightening it is. I was talking to a guy at a conference a couple of weeks ago who defected from the Soviet Union back when you could do that. And the good old days, remember? Things were so simple then. Anyway, he was saying that he couldn't get over how people were having their property taken here, and he had some personal experience with it. And he said, I never thought I'd come to America and the government would be taking people's property. They didn't do that in the Soviet Union quite the same way. They shot you first, I think was the... Then you didn't know about it. So you need intellectual substance, you need victims, and you need a villain. And then you need a simple message. I thought the message yesterday, I forget who mentioned this, it was a really great one about congestion. Congestion Coalition. Thank you very much. That was it, the Congestion Coalition. And I'd like to actually take that idea for a second and take it to another level, which is particularly as it relates to mobility, roads, and all the rest. Who is the victim in congestion? I mean, Congestion Coalition is very good, but how do you create an emotional reaction? And I was thinking about that this morning, and what occurred to me was that emotional reaction is the guy who gets in his car at 5:05, and he's going to drive out to the suburbs where his family lives, and he's the coach for his Little League baseball team with his 8-year-old son. And so you have this shot of him rushing to get in. He's standing there putting on his cleats and pulling up his stuff while he's driving in the highway, and of course he hits bumper-to-bumper traffic. Meanwhile, his wife is taking the kids to the Little League game, and was Daddy going to make it? We won't win without Daddy. And that's how you put an emotional connection there. And then you show the team on the field without their coach. And all the kids looking around with that teary-eyed feeling. And I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it, because I had some sad experiences on Little League fields myself. But that is, talking about, congestion is an interesting thing, but you have to take it to that next level. You have to have that child sitting on that ball field waiting to one of his fathers going to make it to his Little League game, and the father being traumatized by that, and of course the mother being mad at the father because he didn't leave 15 minutes earlier. I mean, you want to talk about a victim, he's a victim on many levels. At least in my marriage, that would be the way it would work. So you need a victim, you need a simple message. And the other thing I think that is really important and not always easy is you need fearless local leadership. And that's a very hard thing to find because, and you do have to be fearless. These are political insiders who will make you feel like an idiot and make you feel like somehow, you went to the dark side. So those are the elements I think of a good campaign. The other thing I think that's important to think about is what the other side has. The other side has inside knowledge. They're on the inside. They know the rules of the game. They have perceived expertise. The deference to the insiders by the media is amazing to me. This assumption that they know what they're talking about is mind-boggling. They often have a very feel-good message, more green space. Who doesn't want more green space? Who doesn't want to save the tree and the spotted owl? They always have villains, as we talked about earlier. They have diffused cost. They are generally very, very good about hiding the true cost and spreading it out so it's just a little bit of a pain for each of us individually. And they have simple solutions. You know, the idea, it's just all we have to do is change this little regulation scheme. So what can you do? You can think about your own roles, whether you're an activist or a policy wonk, and think about how you can bring these networks, these elements together of a good campaign. How do you find victims? When you hear these stories, you've got to write down that name, and you've got to find out who the local activists might be, and you've got to always be having your ear to the ground to try to be the glue that brings all these parts of a good campaign together. And I think the more that we do that, the more creativity and innovation we'll have in executing campaigns. And you can do it on a micro level or a statewide level. It doesn't matter as long as we're doing it. And I think the most important thing is, you know, to be ready, be willing, and be able to do your part, whether you're an activist or a policy person, and you can really make a difference. I think there were stories over the last several days of people making a difference. Suzette Kilo is making a difference. She's at great personal sacrifice, travels and talks about it. You know, Suzette Kilo is a normal person. She's not flying around in the private jet like Al Gore is, while worrying about global warming. You know, the other thing we have on our side is integrity. They certainly do have a huge dose of hypocrisy, though, don't they? That's all I have for you. Thank you very, very much. And think about what you can do to bring people together to be that glue that makes a good campaign effective. Thank you.